would think that Zoom would have a better like recording for that. This meeting is being recorded.
Yeah. And I'm just gonna disable, oh my gosh. Can you hear the background noise? Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. This is LGBTQ plus Job Search 101 with the amazing Matthew French, who is a great higher ed colleague of Suzanne and I, and we are so happy to have him here. Everybody's going to be on mute in the beginning. We are going to do 45 minutes of a presentation with Matthew, and then for the last 15 minutes, we are going to do Q&A. And you can also, send me a message directly if there's a question that you want to ask, but you don't feel like putting it in the chat or saying it out loud. I also want to introduce Suzanne Grossman, who's the Deputy Director of Career Services. This is a CUNY-wide event. Suzanne and I both work at the Mark School of Public and International Affairs in Graduate Career Services, but tonight we have undergrads, grads, alumni. So we thank you all for being here and spending this evening with us. So without further ado, I'm gonna turn it over to Matthew.
Thank you so much, Marnie, and thank you, Suzanne, for having me as well. How's everybody doing? You can give me like a little, ooh, there you go. Good, you gotta like loosen up. You gotta have fun on these virtual Zoom meetings. I know Zoom fatigue is real. I teach on Zoom, I'm on work all day at Zoom. So I really appreciate you all coming out tonight, learning a little bit more about LGBTQ job search. Hopefully you'll learn some new fun tips and tricks as well as insight as you're kind of navigating the professional world and figuring out the right space for you based on your own preferences and your own identities. It's a little bit about myself. Again, Matthew French. I currently work at UNC Charlotte in Charlotte, North Carolina at our University Career Center. I do employer relations, which means I'm basically reaching out to employers all day and saying, come recruit with us, and using my shiny Southern personality to make that happen. I also have about 8 years of experience in higher ed overall, working in New York City and Norfolk, Virginia, and 10 years of experience working within the LGBTQ community through Campus Pride, national nonprofit, also local nonprofits, boards. I've volunteered at the Ali Forney Center working with students in New York when I lived there. I've also volunteered with a lot of youth shelters. I really love and believe in uplifting our community, using my privileges to help others. And so we're going to talk today about Job Search 101. I'm going to share my screen with you all so you can see what's going on this side. I promise I'm pretty good at not like death by PowerPoint, so bear with me on that. Let me bring up my screen. There we go. So we want to share. Oh, here we go. Cool. I was like, where on earth is it? Presents. Can I go to the top? Boom. Okay. Awesome. So to give you a little more background as well, I own my own consulting company where I work with employers, employee resource groups, career centers on making their spaces more queer friendly. And so Awesomely Authentic is the name of the company. I started it probably about 6 months ago, but I've always been really passionate about queer people and making sure that they are finding the right spots for them in their career that makes them feel welcomed however way they wish to feel welcomed. So today I'm going to be kind of going over things that I talk about with employers and recruiters. So that way you also have some insight on kind of like what it all looks like whenever you're kind of looking for that job search. Again, my gender pronouns are he, him, his. I do identify as a white cisgendered gay male. And I think I'm getting tongue-tied because I've had too much energy drink today. And so I want you to know that throughout this presentation, make note of any questions you might have for me. And like Marnie said, you can put them into the private messaging over in the chat section if you don't feel comfortable, having your video on or coming through for audio. That's cool. I'm always happy to answer the questions, no matter how they're given to us. Some ground rules though is this is an open dialogue. I really want you to ask the questions to get the answers to the questions that you have, because this will be kind of a broad strokes overview. We are all learners and we're all lifelong learners. So the information that I'm sharing with you now, I always recommend trying to make sure you keep up to date by connecting with other queer people in professional organizations. And I'll show you how to do that. But also feel free to reach out to me, reach out to your career center. So that way you can make sure you're staying up to date on things like laws, policies, your protections, as well as maybe the way things change in general when it comes for job search and professional work. There's never any judgment on any questions. Is no such thing as a stupid question in my mind. And there's also no judgment on if you decide to come out as an LGBTQ person or an ally, or if you decide to keep that away from your professional brand. There's no judgment on either way you go, because either way is fine. And that's something I really impress upon you, is that it is a personal decision for everything we're going to talk about today. And the Career Center, as well as myself, we're all here to support you in that decision that you make and hopefully help give you some ideas to start to figure out which direction you want to go. I also want you to keep in mind the intersectionalities of your identities through all this, right? So as a white cisgender gay male, I have privileges as being white, as being a male, being cisgendered, but even in the LGBTQ community, I have privileges of being a gay white male, right? So being aware of your privileges, but also being aware of your intersectionalities and how all those play in together to kind of create your personal brand, who you are as a person, and where you're going to find a spot that is most welcoming for you. I also don't believe that this is like a one-size-fits-all approach. There are general broad strokes that I think are super helpful, but each person, each industry, each company is going to be a little different, right? Even individuals that you deal with in your professional life are going to be different. And I really want to press upon you that always feel free to ask questions. Always feel free to check out your career center. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll share all that information with you. So that way you can get that help one-on-one. And again, today topics are a great start. So let's get going. Engines rev. Factors for coming out. So this is what I want you to kind of think about when you're thinking about if you should come out in your job search, because that's honestly what I think most LGBTQ people struggle with a little bit more, right? Before there were federal protections, it was even more so of an issue because you didn't know if you had those legal protections in place. But since the Supreme Court decided that sex now includes gender identity and sexual orientation, we now have federal protections across the United States. But just because there are federal protections, it is honestly really hard to prove when there has been some sort of maybe dismissal or homophobia, transphobia that you might be encountering in the workplace. It's really hard to prove that, honestly. You need a lot of witnesses and all this fun stuff. So what I want to kind of impress upon you is you want to make sure that you're figuring out where you're at currently and then working from there. If you make the decision to come out now on your resume or in your interview or at work, that's awesome, right? But if you decide that you want to come out little by little or test the waters first, that's also okay. So you never want to feel pressured into disclosing parts of your identity if you're not ready for that. And I would especially say that based on maybe industries you're looking at. Certain industries are not going to be maybe as welcoming, while other industries will be super welcoming. I also want you to think through the importance to you if you choose to disclose or not to disclose. And so when I say that, it's thinking through company culture and what's going to be the best fit for you. Like for me, I am super talkative. I'm super outgoing. So my queer identity is pretty much always on my sleeve. But I'm also in education, so that's one reason why. But what you really want to kind of keep in mind is how important is that to you now? And also how important is it that maybe you want to have conversations with your colleagues about who you're dating, or if you went to a fun drag show, or if you have volunteered with a queer organization. If those things are important for you to share, then you will really want to think through that company culture, finding that right fit based on locations, industry, protections, and things that we're going to cover today. So that's kind of like for factors thinking through coming out. And now we're going to talk about researching employers and why it's all important. So like we had talked about, the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission did state that sex now covers gender identity and sexual orientation. So woo. I'm in North Carolina, so they covered nothing. If you're in New York, you did have state and city protections, but now we have federal protections, and federal is the rule of the land. The other thing I want to think through and I want you to be aware of is the workplace, and I added in gender identity management. So this is thinking through your identity when you come into work and not feeling like you have to show all your cards at one time, but that you can actually pick and choose how you come out or how you manage your identity around colleagues to make sure that you're finding a space that works for you, that you're comfortable in, and that you feel welcomed. So it's maybe testing out the waters a little bit, and we've all done it, especially if you're LGBTQ or even an ally, figuring out who is welcoming of queer identities. I have a few clients who say the one thing that they usually try to do is they'll bring up RuPaul's Drag Race to see if someone's interested in that, because they kind of sense that as a flag for like, oh, they watch a LGBTQ show, so maybe they're more queer affirming. They also said in this research in particular around job satisfaction, so job satisfaction can really be connected to that ability for you to share yourself, to be your authentic self in work. So thinking through how that's going to really affect you. You know, I look at my boyfriend, for example. He works in a retirement community as an occupational therapy assistant, but he's also working with clients who are older, who have different worldviews on what it means to be a queer person. So while he is out with some coworkers, he doesn't talk about it, you know, with the clients. Like if they ask him if he has a girlfriend, he just kind of like brushes it off, right? So keeping in mind, like, how important is it to you? Because for me, it's very important. With my boyfriend, it's not as important to come out to everyone. Whereas I like walking into a room and being like, I'm queer, I'm here, what's up? Let's like make some changes. Let's do some fun stuff. Let's work with our LGBTQ students. So that's how I kind of walk into a workplace. So it's all thinking through how you want to walk into a workplace. Something that I really find heartbreaking too is that 50% of LGBTQ Americans don't feel comfortable in coming out at work. I have made it my mission to make sure that that number lowers. I want more people to feel comfortable to coming out at work. I want queer people to be valued for not only the diversity they bring from their life experiences, but the hard skills, the soft skills that they bring as well. Not just their queer identity, but their entire professional identity. And just to give you an idea, thinking over, you know, let's say the Fortune 500 CEOs, there are currently only 3 out people who are CEOs. So you have Tim Cook with Apple, Jim Fitterling with Dow Chemical, and Beth Ford with Land O'Lakes. But if you notice, they are also all 3 white, and they're all also 3 cisgendered. So thinking through, there is a lot of movement that still needs to be done to make sure more queer representation is in higher ranking offices and positions in these companies. And you can be the people who make those strides. You can take your career and go up those ladders. And hopefully this workshop is a good starting point for you to think through how you can kind of traverse the professional world. So why it's important, preparing to investigate, you want to think through what are your values when you think about an employer. So that way you can figure out employers who measure up with your values. You also want to figure out, will you feel welcome? So will you feel like there's other queer people in the room that maybe you want to identify with? Will you feel that it's a space that's welcoming for queer people? Questions like, do they have an employee resource group? And an employee resource group or an affinity group is a group of professionals within a particular company who all identify maybe around a certain identity. So whether LGBTQ or disabilities or veteran or women in STEM, these are all types of affinity groups that you'll see at different organizations, but they're also called a million different things. So it takes a little bit of research, and that information isn't always easy to find, but I'll show you how to get some of that info today. How can I grow and learn there? So what are you gonna get out of that position as far as growing as a professional in your industry and taking you to that next step? And what are cons and pros of the employer? What are things that you're really excited about, but what are things you're a little nervous about? I'm a big believer in list making. So make a list, figure out all these types of information, because not only do you want to find an employer that is welcoming of you of your LGBTQ identity, but you also want to find an employer who matches up with your professional goals, who matches up with your values and who you are as a person overall. Okay, so these are things we're going to be looking for today. I'm going to jump over to my screen, but just to give you kind of a walkthrough, we're going to be looking for information from diversity and equality indexes. We're also going to be looking for employee resource groups, the commitment to creating inclusive environments, diversity in leadership, inclusive benefits, and any red flags. So what I'm about to walk you through is how I have continuously vetted employers for our diversity events here at UNC Charlotte. So we do something called the inclusivity mixer. And this is one way that I go through and comb through for companies to see if they're kind of meeting the expectations of students and the expectations of the event. And it works really well for looking for affirming employers. So here we go. Let's first start with equality indexes. So Diversity Inc. I'm going to stop share and make sure I get the right one sharing. Boom. Everyone see that? Diversity Inc.
Yes.
Sweet. So Diversity Inc. comes up with a list of employers and they have their top 50 overall. But one great way is if you're thinking about what employers do I want to start with? Because there are so many employers, so many options you can go towards. So I always say looking at equality indexes is the first great place to start because they've already kind of proven that inclusive nature. So Diversity Inc. does a lot of different lists for companies. They do their top 50 overall. But if you scroll down, and keep scrolling, it'll come up, I promise. Here we go. So they do have top companies for LGBT people alphabetically. The way this has been measured is it's been measured by things like on the equality index, for HRC equality index, but they're also asking internal questions about employee resource groups. They're asking things about how do they sponsor the community overall. So if you're looking for employers who are already doing the work and already affirming to LGBTQ people, as well as being an ally, these are companies that you might want to start looking for. And so when you look at these companies, keep in mind they are huge corporations, so they hire across multiple industries and multiple majors. So don't feel like, oh, well, you know, AT&T is probably going to hire tech and business students. That's not necessarily true. They're also going to hire marketing students, HR students, which can be a variety of majors. They're going to hire art students, graphic design majors. So keeping in mind that as you look at these employers, being open and doing that extra legwork for searching for the employers and looking at what all they might have that's for you. So this is one great way to kind of start looking for an employer in particular. I always like to highlight one employer, and I use them a lot for the presentation. Ally Financial is an amazing institution, an amazing employer that has done a lot for queer people and has done a lot for LGBT identities. So we're going to kind of walk through here, and it's in alphabetical order. So what I find interesting is Ally is not on this particular list, but I do think they have to opt into this list. So that's one key difference. Most of these you'll see. This one, including the HRC Equality Index, are opted into by employers. So it's not something where they're being forced to do it usually. Most of the things and the information they are given to, they are giving Diversity Inc. or the HRC Equality Index, those are also self-reported a lot of times. So we do have to take some of this with a grain of salt, knowing that they are open to being highlighted as an LGBT welcoming employer, but also kind of knowing that this information is self-reported. So sometimes you might not get the full clear picture. The next thing I want to show you, so going from Diversity Inc. is one thing. You'll also, I will share this PowerPoint with Marnie so she can share it with all of you, and you'll be able to go through and click the links and follow the presentation and all that fun stuff. Next up, I already went ahead and went to HRC's Equality Index. I usually just search like HRC Equality Index. Now, for those of you who are in the LGBTQ community, you may or may not know the HRC Human Rights Campaign does have a really sketchy past when it comes to being trans inclusive. I do think that there have been some strides for them to kind of correct that, but the HRC Equality Index is still a really helpful tool because they do ask trans-specific questions from employers, and they ask questions around specifically healthcare coverage. Now, healthcare coverage for a lot of trans individuals is a really enticing thing that an employer offers, right? For any sort of transitioning types of health procedures, right? The hard part though is that they don't usually share that information with you up front about what all is included in that policy. And there has been also some information around like Starbucks, for example, who has trans inclusive policies around healthcare, but whenever trans people go to use that perk, there seems to be a lot of issues happening with red tape, bureaucracy, and all that stuff. So again, I tell you that because while we can use tools to really propel ourselves forward, to arm ourselves with hopefully making the best decisions, you might still run into issues around your queer identity in your workplace. And it's really important also, I think, if you feel comfortable bringing those to the attention of like your HR or something like that, but also not feeling like you have to be an advocate, right? You want to be an employee, you want to contribute. So it's always, there's always ways maybe of going to like your employee resource group or things like that to think through those things. But the HRC Equality Index is going to be a really good tool for you to utilize. They do have a 100% score. And you can scroll down through here and it'll actually let you see all the amount of points they could get, their workforce protections, their inclusive benefits, the things that they are offering. So you can get a really good idea about an employer through all this information. But again, it is self-reported, so just take that with a grain of salt sometimes. Okay, so the next thing that we do is I really like to Google. Google will be your best friend. So for example, let's take Ally Financial, for example, or I think what might be even a better one that came out recently is, let's go back. I want to search on the Equality Index for Goldman Sachs. Now, nothing I'm showing you is supposed to be dragging an employer through the mud or anything. It's just simply what's out there. And so I'm just trying to give you a variety of ideas of what you might run into. So Goldman Sachs, let's click. And so they have 100% for their 2020 score. And you're like, awesome, look at all this amazing stuff that they're kind of doing. So that's great. Now let's move on to the next step, which I like to do is, so I will type in Goldman Sachs, and then I'm going to type in discrimination. So the reason I want to do this is because now I want to see how is this company maybe dealing with discrimination. And so I will start looking to see if there are news articles or any sort of lawsuits that have been brought up. And it looks like, so here's something, like we can click on it, we can learn a little bit more. So this is September 2010, 2014, 2017. So I'm kind of reading like based on dates to kind of figure out where are they at. And something I want to make sure you keep in mind is an employer cannot control their employees and how they feel about queer people. They can't. Now, what they can control is making sure that the company culture is affirming to you and that you are safe being who you are in that company culture. So what I always say is don't judge an employer if they've had a lawsuit or brought against them or anything like that. Judge them on how they reacted to the situation, right? Did they deny, cover up? That's probably not the best look. Or did they take responsibility? Did they implement a new program? Did they do something to kind of like field out that a little bit more? So I know, for example, for Goldman Sachs, like there might be issues around, like I'll click news even to see what happens if anything comes back. So McDonald's has been sued. Congratulations, McDonald's. So I don't see anything like, oh, Apple Card discrimination. And this was 2019. So again, thinking about the intersectionalities of your identity, you might want to take a deeper look into some of these things. And again, this is not to be dragging employers through the mud, but it is to be aware of what's going on out there, right? It's easy for employers to say, we're affirming and giving us the month of June and being like, here's a LGBT Instagram flag post, right? That's pretty easy. But to make sure that your company is culturally competent to intersectionality of identities and LGBTQ people, there's a little more legwork that might need to be done. So that's why you really have to maybe do that little extra push of this research that we're kind of going through right now. So we did that. We did the like Google just looking for discrimination. You can also do it maybe on keyword searches. What I also like to do is I'm gonna go ahead and just do Glassdoor. So for those of you who do not know, Glassdoor is a great resource. It's free to use as long as you leave an anonymous feedback of a past position or an employer that you've been at previously. But you can see things like interview questions. You can see things like pay ranges, all that fun stuff. But you can also see reviews of companies. Oh, of course it's making me do this. And I just got a new computer, so I don't know my password. So we're going to do Glassdoor. So you can just type in the company name, Glassdoor, and then it'll give you this rating system overall from 934 ratings. So you can click on it, and then you can start going through and reading reviews about the company. So if you click reviews, you can start seeing pros and cons overall about the company. Oh, stop this, stop doing this to me. Hopefully I don't click anything and won't pop up again. Oh, it did. Darn. So what you want to do on that specific page, because I want to make sure we keep it going so we have time for questions, is if you do Control F, so that keyword search, and I would Control F for words like homophobia, transphobia, inclusion, diversity, discrimination. Keyword search those buzzwords to see if it shows up anywhere in reviews. Using this way, I've actually been able to work with a lot of employers who have negative reviews on Glassdoor around those areas and work with them to be more inclusive based on past employee feedback. So it's a really great tool for you to utilize to kind of get that inside addition from past employees. Okay, so the next thing we want to kind of think through is the company's website. So this will give you kind of a way for you to go through and search for the company specifically. So let's continue with Ally. So Ally Financial, and then I would do like Employee Resource Group. And so we got this first one that comes up, and then you can start looking through and kind of gaining a better idea about their diversity. I mean, they're really talking a lot about celebrating people's differences. And here we go. Our employee resource groups create an open forum. So these are all their employee resource groups. You'll find out that a lot of times the employee resource groups, these are created internally, usually by professionals. If they do not have an employee resource group, normally most companies will start with a diversity council or diversity committee, which is made up of people from across different identities. Especially if it's maybe a smaller to mid-sized company, but larger companies like Ally should usually have a affinity group. Like there's not a major organization I can think of that does not have an affinity group, or at least the ability to have one. So if they are a huge organization, but they don't have an LGBT one, I would always maybe kind of put a question mark by that, because I'd be a little worried, why aren't queer people being represented within such a large organization? But then you can also search for words like spectrum, pride, what's the other one? Rainbow, those type of words, maybe typing in like Ally, Rainbow Employee Resource Group, Ally, Pride Resource Group. If you type those words in with the employer that you're trying to research, it's going to allow you to hopefully find them a little bit easier based on information you kind of know about how resource groups are named. Sometimes resource groups are also not shared publicly as much because they believe it to be more of an internal type of thing. So one thing that you can do to kind of find out what type of resource groups are there is through my favorite website, and that is LinkedIn. Okay, so let's go up here to LinkedIn. Who all has a LinkedIn? You can like me, wave your hands. Oh, most people do. Okay, good. So LinkedIn, I am Obsessed with. I am on it, I would say, probably at least a couple hours a day, if not more. I'm super obsessed with it. So we're going to figure out how we can use LinkedIn to find those mentors, find those people that we want to connect with, find people to learn more for informational interviews, which is kind of like asking someone their professional biography. People love talking about themselves. So really use that to your advantage when you're reaching out to people and creating information sessions or informational interviews that you can find out more about a person, how they got to where they are, but also figuring out more around a company particular that maybe they've worked for. So I'm going to first start by just coming up here into the search section, and I'm going to search Ally. And I want to go to more because I want companies. Here we go. So Ally Financial. Let's click it. So now we're going to be able to see all the employees who work at Ally, so we could go that way. It'll also tell you if you have people who currently work there. So you can click that and see those connections. So maybe you can start reaching out to these people. You tell I have like Chief Diversity Officer, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. So I have a lot of those types of people on my LinkedIn. But you can always reach out to them and start chatting with them about maybe ways to learn more about Ally. But you can also click the See All Employees. And so I'm kind of like looking through here. And so let's say, for example, maybe they didn't have information about their resource groups. I would start trying to find people who are in their college recruiting, early talent acquisition, university recruiters. Those are the types of job titles you want to be looking for on LinkedIn to connect with them if you want to ask them about company culture maybe. Now, if you're looking specifically for maybe a person who is with the Pride Ally group, I'm going to type in Ally. So it's not going to, let's see what comes up. I don't even know what will come up. So anyone who has that Pride Ally in their profile is going to come up. So we'll click Salim to learn a little bit more about Salim. And I want to do Control F because I want to find out where it says Pride. And it looks like it says it somewhere in here. Probably on See More. See More. See More. It's in here somewhere. Does anyone else see it? Because I don't. But you get the general gist, right? Everyone gets the gist. So that way you can kind of go through and you can like search their profile, maybe get a better understanding of who they are. But what I also think is really cool is, let's say you are interested in Ally, you're interested in learning about their diversity and inclusion, but maybe you're also interested in being a marketing specialist around diversity and inclusion. So there are so many ways you can use your LinkedIn where you can look at Salim, you can reach out to him and ask about LGBTQ inclusion. You can ask him about their Pride organization. You can ask him about Ally overall, but then you can also use his LinkedIn to look at where he's been professionally and kind of get an idea of like, okay, so I want his job one day. I want to do what he's doing. So it looks like he worked as a staff writer. He was an account executive at Niner Media, but then he's done a marketing internship. So let's say you're wanting to start out his career and go down that career path. Maybe you want to look into Charlotte Motor Speedway or NASCAR for a marketing internship. Maybe you also see that you're graduating and you know that Carolina Clinical Trials hired him right out of graduation. So maybe they would be a good one to go to. And you can also ask Salim about all of these places he's worked before and about their LGBTQ inclusion and what his experiences were at those companies. I absolutely adore LinkedIn. I think it's the best way for you to get a lot of great information. If you do want to ask them for information, you simply can message them if you're connected with them. You can also, see if we can find someone who I'm not connected with. You can also look at their website or their profile. You can click connect. You always want to add a note. Please always add a note. I'm actually happy to accept every person on here who sends me a request on LinkedIn, but I ask that you send me a note because I want you to get in that like vibe of getting your notes together, making sure that you can tell me like, oh, like you presented today on LGBT Job Search 101. I'm like, cool, sweet, approved. But then I might sometimes get someone randomly to add me and I'm like, I don't know who you are. I'm not for sure how we connect. So sometimes I don't approve. So make sure you send that, that little note, tell them why you want to do this, why you want to connect with them. If you're using the app, make sure that you hit the little down arrow and hit personalize invite, because if you use the app and just hit connect, it does not prompt you to personalize your invite. So make sure you are personalizing the invite. I would honestly make sure that you are just using your LinkedIn on a desktop computer. It's a little user friendly, but it also prevents you from accidentally hitting connect and not being able to send a message of why you want to talk with them. So if I wanted to talk to Sherry, for example, who I just clicked on, I would say, hey, I'm really interested in Ally. I'm specifically interested on your diversity and company culture. I would love to connect. And then you can start having that conversation once they've connected. But as you know, I'm sure if you have a LinkedIn, some people do not always reach out properly. And so I'm about to show you something that, you know, the great Ben Parker, Peter Parker's uncle said is, with great power comes great responsibility. So what I'm about to show you is use it with professionalism. Use it not indiscriminately, but use it when you really need to utilize it. For those of you who don't know, something called Hunter.io. I actually learned about this at a event when I lived in New York City. But what Hunter.io does is it takes company URLs and then you can find employers, people's emails online. It kind of aggregates it for you. So if we do Ally, it has 142 results that are coming up. You click on it, and then you can come down through here and it actually will give you people's emails. It'll give you their name, sometimes even their job title. So like maybe for like Emily Orlando, we don't know what she does, but we can do copy and paste. And I want to go back to LinkedIn. Come on, LinkedIn. Ooh. I want to go back to LinkedIn. I'm going to type in Emily Orlando, Ally. So she was a marketing specialist, but now she is at Airmark. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, okay, you're super sleuthy right now. You are just hardcore researching people. Employers are doing it to you. They are looking you up on social media. They are looking at your LinkedIn. They are looking you up. But so why not kind of reverse it and take that little extra step to reach out to people through Hunter.io. What you can also do is, let's take Emily Martinez, for example. Maybe you want to talk to her. Actually, I want just Ally again. Let's say you want to talk to Angela from Ally. What you can do is get her name. You can search right here. Let's search for Angela. So nothing comes up for Angela, but based on everyone else's email, they can guess that this is her email based off everyone else. So you can actually copy angela.dimmers@Ally and send them an email. So when I say with great power comes great responsibility, you don't want to email a million people at a company. You don't want to email anyone and everyone, because then you're going to be that person. You want to be the person who's really making great connections. And so one way to do that is to send out an email to a professional, wait about a week. If you don't hear anything back to them, reply to that same email saying, hey, I know you're super busy, but I just wanted to check it up on this. If you don't hear from them for a few days, then move on to another contact and try it again. So don't throw out a million fish lines, throw out one fish line and wait for you to get a bite, right? Because that way it keeps you from spamming people and being that type of person. So make sure you're aware of all those fun things. Okay, so let's head back over here to our presentation. Make sure I'm sharing the right screen again. Okay, so that is a major part of the search process. I'm sure your mind right now is just like, holy cow, that's a lot of work. And you don't have to do it for every employer if you don't want to. I just simply want to make sure you're aware of the tools to go through and find employers who are welcoming. One thing that I will touch on that used to be in my presentations, but is no longer in my presentations, but I also like to kind of mention it, is look at the discrimination policy for employers that you are applying for. Even though federal protections now define sex as including gender identity and sexual orientation, it doesn't take that much for an employer to add and specifically say gender identity and sexual orientation in their non-discrimination policy. Now, if those specifics are not laid out, does not mean that the employer's, homophobic or transphobic, but it does kind of give you an idea of are queer identities and LGBTQ people and allies, are they at the forefront of kind of like HR or people that you might be working with? And it's also something you can definitely bring up if you want to as well. One thing that I want to touch on real quick before we wrap up for this evening is framing of your LGBTQ plus experiences. So that discussion we had around coming out or not coming out, I want to talk a little bit about that, how you can maybe frame them based on your different choices. Overall resume tips, one page is usually ideal. Unless you're maybe a graduate student who's going into, academia, but even as a grad student, trying to keep it to that one page succinct resume is super important. Now, things like, government resumes, all those types of resumes are a little different. So those can be more than one page, but your traditional resume, one page. I really recommend adding your LinkedIn URL to the header of your resume. So that way you can encourage employers to go see everything about you and all the stuff you've done, the volunteering. Your LinkedIn is really meant for you to breathe life into your resume, to give life to you as a candidate. And so that's why I always really recommend making sure that if your LinkedIn is updated and you're consistently engaging on LinkedIn, to make sure to add that profile URL to your header. Use your preferred name. So if you have not had your name legally changed, maybe you're transitioning or you go by a different name than what you were given at birth, make sure you use that preferred name on your resume and keep it consistent on resume, documents, things like that. The only time you do need to give your legal name or the name you were given at birth is whenever you are filling out paperwork. So this is after you've been hired, after interviews and all of that. So you do not need to disclose anything maybe about being trans or anything like that or name changes. But make sure you use that preferred name off the get-go. If you're non-binary or genderqueer and you wish to use genderqueer types of pronouns like they, them, theirs, make sure you set that as a precedent beforehand. I mean, yes, you are outing yourself, but it's also going to make you feel more welcome if people are not misgendering you daily. Make sure you use action verbs from position descriptions. So look through those position descriptions, use those action verbs. I'm sure this is things you have not, that you've probably heard time and time again from your career coaches at your different institutions. So make sure you're visiting your career center to get these resumes really tip-top shape for sending them out into the world for jobs and internships. One last thing is you make sure you use past tense for past positions, present tense for positions you're still working at, and proofread. So many recruiters I work with say that they will throw away a resume the first time they come in contact with a misspelling or a grammatical error. So make sure you're utilizing your career center and their services to help you get that resume assistance. Okay. So just like other experiences, you want to focus on those skills that you've utilized and cultivated. And so it's no different when you're thinking about your LGBTQ experiences. And when I say LGBTQ, maybe you're part of a student org, maybe you volunteered at the LA Fortnite Center or, a local LGBT organization. Maybe you have helped with an AIDS walk or something. All these different things could denote to an employer that you are part of the LGBTQ community or you're an ally. So it's really a roll of the dice is what I like to say. You need to make that decision again, and it's a personal one of if you want to come out or not come out and when you want to do that. Just knowing that if you do come out, you could have a recruiter who is homophobic or transphobic. But then you have to be okay with that decision of saying, if someone doesn't want me because of my identity, is that a place I really want to be? Is that a place that I want to give my skill sets to? And again, that's a personal decision for yourself. And that's where you utilize your career coaches. I'm also happy to answer questions to help you kind of traverse those areas. So for example, let's say this is something underneath your experiences section that you are the president of Spectrum. You can see throughout the bullet points that I am focusing on the skills, but then I'm also having things like LGBTQ in there, HRC North Carolina, Equality North Carolina, those types of things. But then if we take this and then we come over and we can actually call Spectrum a community enrichment. This is if you don't want to come out right away on your resume. And then you focus again on those skill sets as well, but you really don't have to note that it's LGBTQ, right? If you're asked in an interview about what's community enrichment, you can say, oh, it was a human rights organization where we focused on a variety of rights for different minority groups. So again, you don't have to out yourself as LGBTQ until you're ready to do it. Or you can say, yes, it's spectrum. It's part of a queer community. Last thing I want to touch on are some resources. Make sure you check out some of these resources. Again, I will share this with Marnie. There is a LinkedIn group for LGBTQ professionals. There's also an amazing Facebook group for LGBTQ professionals. Just go to Facebook, search LGBTQ professionals. There are thousands of people in there from all around the country and the world who talk about different industries, who give insight, who'll do informational interviews with you. If you're interested in tech, I really would encourage you to join Out in Tech. There's also a Slack group with Out in Tech, and I can share that information with Marnie as well if you want to join the Out in Tech Slack group. I'm excited to connect with you all. Feel free to follow us on IG. Send me an email, that's my email, and you can also connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll put my LinkedIn and information into the comment section so you guys can have that as well. Now, question.
Okay, so everybody, if you want to ask a question out loud, raise your hand and I can unmute you. You can also just put them in the chat. If you want to send a question to me and just have me read it anonymously, we can do that too, which we already do have one question. So this is a really interesting question, Matthew, that I had never even thought about. Are there any LGBTQ search firms, like staffing firms?
There are none that I know of right off the top of my head. Now, there are some who will focus specifically around industry, but not specifically around queer people. So, for example, what I do in my work is I will help make those connections for queer people that I work with already, or that's where Out in Tech, that's where the LGBTQ professionals org on Facebook will be super helpful for you, because you could literally put out there, hey, I'm looking for this. Does anyone have any assistance? Or, hey, I want to work here. Does anyone work there? And that will give you that inroads. The thing that I would really say for staffing, that staffing agencies basically have just really big networks. And so that's you just building your network by finding more queer people. I do know that Campus Pride, the largest LGBTQ organization, is going to be creating a mentoring and jobs board. The reason I know that is because I'm helping them create it. So that should be hopefully released here in the next couple months. And I'll be sure to send that information to Marnie, and she can share it with everyone as well once we go live with that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Anybody else who has questions can put in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I can unmute you. Let me know. And let's see. Okay. So question for Matthew. I guess like we kind of talked about like the pros and cons of like coming out in the workplace versus not coming out. I guess, could you go over those like in a little more detail potentially? Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, so when you're thinking about the pros and cons, again, it's more of a thought of like what's important to you. So when you think about a pro and con list, I would say like one pro could be, you know what, I'll give you an example. I'm a storyteller. Communication is one of my Clifford strengths, so I love telling stories. I've worked in higher education, and I think people all the times think that maybe higher ed is a welcoming space. I will tell you that I interviewed with a large Southern university. I talked about all my experiences. Everyone seemed to love me. And then I didn't get the job, and I asked for feedback. And I was super excited about that because it was a large institution. It was in the South. It was a lot of first-generation college students. It had great brand name recognition, so I knew I could find a lot of cool employers. But when I asked for feedback, they told me that the partner college, the College of Business that would be helping pay for part of the salary, was worried about my queer experiences influencing my work too much. Even though all day I'd been told, diversity, diversity, diversity. But then when it came down to it, they told me that, and I was just like, you know, holy cow, like, I'm glad I didn't go there, because one con that will never, this is me personally, that will never trump anything, is I want to be at a place where I can be myself. I am a kind of weird, quirky person who talks about queer people, who will bring up marginalized communities anytime I feel like it's necessary. And so that's one thing I won't budge on. And so now I know like that is something that really is a huge con to me if an employer cannot meet that. So you have to be okay with saying goodbye to some employers if they don't meet that value for you, or you can do the other way, and you can go internally and start trying to make change internally. But I also don't want to put that on LGBTQ people to feel like they have to be advocates within their professional world when they're just going to do a job like anyone else. But if you want to take up that mantle, I will say that I'm always happy to support you. I'm always happy to give you information and to connect you with people in my network who work on a lot of those different organizations.
Okay, great. Thank you, Matthew. Okay, another question. How should one highlight their LGBTQ experience without seemingly leaning on it too much?
Yeah, that's good. That's a good question. So I would say talk about it more around the skill sets and not just saying like LGBTQ like every other word, right? The skill sets are what employers are really looking for. Now, the queer experience could be a great plus for them because maybe they have diversity and inclusion hiring practices. And there are some people who will say, well, I want to be hired for my skill sets and not my identity. Totally get that. But you're not being hired for your identity. You're being hired for your skill sets. They wouldn't hire you if you didn't have your skill sets. They're simply trying to have different hiring practices that will increase recruitment talent pools, right? So when you talk about your queer experiences, I would say it's especially important if you want it to be known to an employer, but also if you're looking to demonstrate the diversity you have around your experiences when it comes to professional organizations. Maybe you've worked specifically at an LGBT org or you volunteered. I would say most people I work with tend to volunteer at LGBT organizations. And so that's where they can demonstrate what's important to them as a value to an employer, but also demonstrate that they're involved in the community at large.
Okay, awesome. Okay, next question. How do you recommend getting involved with LGBTQ outreach organizations?
So when you say outreach organizations, I guess maybe a little more clarification. What an outreach?
Okay, well, let's see if this person will give more.
Hi. Yes.
Oh, hi, Daniel.
Hi.
I meant like doing volunteer work. Like, how did you get started on that?
Sure, yeah, so doing volunteer work, it's actually super easy. Most queer organizations need help. You guys, most of y'all are in New York under normal circumstances. So I know the LA Forney Center is always looking for people to help do career coaching, to help be a mentor for students, especially trans kids of color, especially is who they help. But then there's also like the New York LGBT Center, the Stonewall. You can literally just search LGBT volunteering and your city or state, and you can find tons of stuff. Another place you can go if maybe you can't find something local to you is catchafire.org. I'll post that. .org. This is skills-based volunteering, and these are all nonprofits that you're working with. And so you can actually help them do everything from creating a website to marketing to social media to helping them do their accounting, and it's all volunteer. And then it actually tells you how much you saved that nonprofit by helping them, and you can add that to your resume. You can also search LGBT specifically in there and find organizations that are looking for volunteers who are LGBT organizations.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks for the question, Daniel. So, okay, Matthew, we have time for a few more questions. Is there one thing you wish you knew kind of before you entered your professional career that you wish you had known when you were still in school?
That's a good question. You know, something I wish I would have known beforehand is I wished I would have known that I could be as gay as I wanted to be and not have seen any issues, right? I think when I first started my professional life, as an intern, I was more reserved because I was afraid if I didn't control my actions of being like more of a feminine male, or talk about my gayness too much, that it would like hurt my professional brand and who I was. But I am so happy that I figured out like, oh my God, I can be myself and my total authentic self. And I've never met one person who does not like me. I mean, not to like to my own horn, but it's because I'm so authentic with who I am. I'm so authentic with who I want to be and what drives my work. And I think that is something I wish, what I like to call my baby years when I was a little baby gay. That's where I wished I would have known that a little bit more. I do think I do have that privilege though, as a gay white male, my identity is accepted a lot more in mainstream and is what most people have seen in mainstream media. And so now my really big focus as well is on queer, non-binary, and trans job seekers. One thing that I do want to say is that Netflix, for example, if you look at their job application, they actually allow you to opt in your gender identity and your sexual orientation. It's not required, but they allow you to opt into it. I want to make that a common thing for everyone, for all employers. I want to give you that ability to opt in so that way they can support LGBTQ people in the workplace. Because they ask it already about disabilities. They ask about gender, but it's just male, female normally. They ask it about, race. So why can't they ask it about queer people? And why can't queer people decide to or not to tell it on their job description?
Okay, great. So I think we have time for maybe one or maybe two more questions. Okay, this is an amazing question. Is gay mentoring a thing? Can you find a gay mentor? Like, are there gay networking, groups, anything like that?
Well, I would say if you take it off of the literal meaning, I have a gay mentor when I was a little gay baby figuring out the LGBTQ world in general. And, when you're I came from a small town. So when you're coming from a little small town and you're trying to figure out your way through the world, having a mentor from the LGBTQ community is super important. I have a mentee right now, and he's amazing. And I'm here to help him like with his professional dreams and goals and making connections for him. But my mentor is not a gay man at all. He is my thesis advisor who studies queer theory, or he was my thesis advisor, and I've known him for probably since my undergrad years. I did my thesis on Storm from the X-Men, if anyone's intrigued, and her use of gender and race and queerness, but so if anyone ever talks about superheroes, I'm down. So I would say to look for a mentor. Go to, I'm telling you, everyone should join the LGBTQ professionals organization on Facebook. Just search LGBTQ professionals. It is the most embracing, welcoming, affirming group that I've been in. And there are tons of people there. I can guarantee you, if you asked for a mentor in whatever industry you're interested in, there would be someone who would step up. LinkedIn is also a great place for you to go and find those mentors. And I would say if you're looking for a mentor in technology, Out in Tech is a prime place to go to ask for a mentor. And if you're looking for mentors in other industries, use LinkedIn, use the LGBTQ professionals group within LinkedIn. Or if you're really having a hard time, talk to your career center or even ask me, and I can see if I can find someone to help connect you with. But I think mentoring is super useful. And Campus Pride, we will have a mentoring part of the platform that students will be able to use, where you can say, I want to mentor, or I want to have a mentor from this company who identifies this way. And then we will match you with someone based on that criteria. Okay. Coming in a few months.
Excellent. Okay, so we're at 6 p.m. and I want to be respectful of your time. I'm going to put all your Instagram, your email, your website, your LinkedIn. Again, people, if you want to connect with Matthew, please send him a note and tell him you came to this presentation. And if you had a question that you didn't get to ask tonight, this is a great way to connect with Matthew and you can ask him the question. So Matthew, thank you so much. This is really like the first event of this kind that we've done. And so we really and truly appreciate you coming to share your knowledge with us. And Oh, someone says, can I email you directly, Matthew? Why don't you send Matthew a LinkedIn message? I mean, he put his email there, actually. You can go ahead and email him.
Yeah, email me, shoot me a message, however you like.
Okay, Matthew, you may be getting a number of messages after this from hopefully excited students. So thank you again so much. We hope to do another event with you. And thank you again, everybody, for attending and participating.
Thank you all so much. Go forth, conquer, and mess some shit up.
Thanks, Matthew. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.